The wind howled across the alien arena, a vast, sun-scorched battlefield carved from black stone. At its center, a lone human stood, his boots planted firmly on the ancient dueling ground. His name was Daniel Carter, a specialist in first-contact negotiations, not combat. And yet, here he was, unarmed, facing down a towering warrior from a species that had conquered half the known galaxy. Across from him, the alien shifted her weight, the muscles beneath her gleaming armor flexing as she raised a wickedly barbed spear. This was supposed to be a diplomatic mission, a simple meeting between humanity and the Exathan Dominion to establish peaceful relations. But the Exathan, a species built on honor and conquest, saw negotiations as weakness. When talks stalled, their leader had laughed and proposed an alternative trial by combat. If humanity wanted a seat at the table, they had to prove their worth in the arena. Daniel had protested, but before he could argue, a name had been chosen. His. The Exathan warrior across from him let out a low growl, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of the assembled crowd. She was tall, easily 7 feet, and her crimson eyes gleamed with the cold certainty of a seasoned fighter. The spear in her hands was no ceremonial weapon. The moment she moved, the crowd roared, their voices rising in a frenzied chant. With terrifying speed, she hurled the spear, a blur of metal cutting through the air toward his chest. Instinct took over. Daniel's hand shot up, fingers closing around the shaft mid-flight. The impact jolted through his arm, but he barely felt it. He was too busy watching the alien's face shift from triumph to something else, shock, then realization. The crowd fell silent. The warrior took a single step back, her massive form suddenly rigid. Daniel wasn't sure what had just happened, but the reaction of the gathered Exathan told him it was significant. He looked down at the spear, still clutched in his hand. Slowly, he lifted his eyes back to the warrior. Then, she did something he didn't expect. She dropped to one knee, lowering her head in submission. A murmur rippled through the audience, quickly rising into shouts of disbelief. Daniel caught bits of their alien language, words he couldn't fully understand except one. It repeated over and over. Bonded. The Exathan leader, seated high above the arena, stood abruptly, his expression thunderous. Daniel barely had time to process what was happening before the warrior before him lifted her gaze, her crimson eyes locking onto his with a look of fierce determination. By the ancient laws of her people, he had just unknowingly invoked a bond older than the Dominion itself. A warrior who had their weapon caught in single combat was no longer their opponent. They were bound to the one who caught it, sworn to serve them. Forever. Daniel barely breathed as the weight of the moment settled over him. The Exathan warrior remained kneeling, her spear surrendered, her posture unwavering. The silence in the arena was thick with something he couldn't quite name: shock, anger, anticipation. His heart pounded, but he kept his expression neutral, his fingers tightening around the spear. He didn't know the customs, but his instincts told him that any wrong move could turn this already precarious situation into something far worse. The Exathan leader, draped in regal black armor, stepped forward, his heavy cloak billowing behind him. His voice, deep and resonant, cut through the murmuring crowd. Daniel's translator implant barely managed to keep up with the alien dialect. "You invoke the right of the spear, human." His tone was laced with something dangerously close to contempt. "Do you even understand what you have done?" Daniel glanced at the kneeling warrior before him. Her crimson eyes burned with something unreadable, but there was no hesitation, no doubt. She had accepted this. He just didn't know what this was. He chose his words carefully. "I know that I didn't come here for a fight. But your warrior chose to test me, and I simply reacted." He shifted his grip on the spear, feeling its weight, its balance. "If that broke some kind of rule, then maybe the problem isn't me, it's your traditions." A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. A human challenging Exan-law? That was unheard of. The leader's expression darkened, but before he could respond, the kneeling warrior finally spoke. "The right is honored." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "The bond is absolute." Daniel's translator struggled with the last word, spitting out a handful of possible meanings: sworn, claimed, oath, bound. None of them reassured him. Then she rose. In one fluid motion, she stood beside him, not in opposition, but as though she were a soldier awaiting orders. Her posture was rigid, disciplined, her presence radiating something almost protective. The leader's fists clenched. You would truly bind yourself to this outsider? This weakling? Something flickered in the warrior's eyes, a brief but unmistakable challenge. He caught my spear. She turned slightly, speaking now directly to Daniel. And by the laws of my people, I am yours to command. Daniel's breath hitched. Command? He hadn't just won a duel. He had claimed something far more dangerous, a warrior of the Exathan dominion. A living weapon bound to his will. And from the fury on the leader's face, this was not something he had expected. The silence broke in an instant. A different Exathan warrior, standing among the high-ranking officials, suddenly lunged forward, drawing a blade from his belt. The motion was fast, too fast. Daniel had no time to react. But she did. With inhuman speed, the warrior beside him intercepted the attack, gripping the assailant's wrist with bone-crushing force. The sound of metal hitting the stone floor echoed through the arena as she twisted his arm and forced him to his knees. The message was clear. She wasn't just honoring a law. She was enforcing it. The leader's eyes burned with rage, his fingers tightening on the hilt of his own weapon. You do not understand what you have done, human. His voice was dangerously low now, laced with something cold and venomous. You think you have won something here? You have only marked yourself for death. The warrior at Daniel's side didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to him, her voice even. Your orders, Commander? Daniel's stomach turned. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. But in this moment, with every eye in the arena locked on him, it no longer mattered. He had just become one. The weight of the moment pressed down on Daniel, but he forced himself to stand tall. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But he knew that wasn't an option. He had just upended centuries of Exathan tradition, and now, whether he wanted it or not, he was at the center of something far bigger than a simple diplomatic mission. The warrior at his side, his warrior stood ready, crimson eyes scanning for any further threats. The leader of the Exathans still watched him with barely concealed fury, but he did not strike. Not yet. The silence didn't last long. Somewhere in the upper tiers of the arena, a figure stirred. A human dressed in the high-collared uniform of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. Ambassador Raymond Calloway. Daniel had never trusted him. He was too polished, too willing to bend under pressure. And now, with all eyes on Daniel, Calloway took a slow step forward, clearing his throat. Specialist Carter, he said smoothly, his voice calm but cold, this has escalated beyond your authority. The United Earth government will decide the next course of action. Daniel clenched his jaw. Beyond his authority? He hadn't asked for this. He'd been thrown into it. But Calloway wasn't done. He turned to the Exathan leader, speaking in flawless Exan dialect, his voice measured. The actions of one man do not represent the will of humanity. I propose we disregard this unfortunate event and return to negotiations. Daniel felt his pulse spike. He's trying to erase what just happened. As if none of it mattered. But the warrior beside him stiffened, her muscles coiled with barely restrained tension. The Exathan leader's eyes flicked between them before settling on Calloway. The right of the spear cannot be undone. His voice was sharp, final. To challenge it is to deny our very history. His gaze darkened. Do you claim the United Earth government does not honor oaths? Calloway hesitated for the briefest of moments. It was enough. The murmurs from the Exathan officials turned into something sharper, more hostile. Daniel exhaled slowly, shifting the spear in his grip. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about how humanity would be seen in the eyes of the Dominion. Weak. Unreliable. Unworthy. He turned his attention back to the warrior at his side. What's your name? He asked quietly. For the first time since the fight, something flickered in her expression. Surprise. But only for a moment. Vara. Daniel nodded. All right, Vara. He met her gaze. Are you willing to stand by this oath? She didn't hesitate. I am bound by it. That was all he needed to hear. He faced the Exathan leader, standing straighter. Then I accept. The arena erupted into chaos. Some Exathan warriors roared their approval, while others looked outraged. Calloway cursed under his breath, but Daniel barely heard him. He was too busy noticing the leader's expression, less fury now, more calculation. Then the leader spoke, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. Then know this, human. By claiming her, you claim her honor, her victories, and her enemies. His gaze locked onto Daniel's, cold and final. They will come for you. A chill ran down Daniel's spine, but before he could respond, a distant explosion rocked the arena. A deep, thunderous boom, followed by the unmistakable howl of sirens. Something was happening. Vara was already moving, positioning herself between him and the threat. Zathan soldiers rushed toward the exits, barking orders in their guttural language. Calloway was yelling something, but Daniel ignored him. Above them, the sky darkened as the massive form of a warship descended from the clouds, its engines flaring blue against the smoke-choked horizon. And on its hull, painted in bold crimson, was a symbol Daniel had never seen before. But Vara had. Her face darkened, her grip tightening around her now drawn blade. The Forsaken, she murmured, her voice filled with something he had never heard before. Fear. The warship loomed above them, its descent slow and deliberate, as if savoring the fear it instilled. Daniel barely had time to process the symbol before the first blast struck the outer city. Bright streaks of plasma cut through the sky, slamming into the distant spires with deafening force. The ground trembled beneath his feet. Screams erupted in the arena as the Exathans scattered, some drawing weapons, others fleeing toward the tunnels. Vara grabbed his arm, her grip like iron. We have to move. Now. Daniel didn't argue. He sprinted alongside her, weaving through the chaos. Calloway was nowhere to be seen, but Daniel had no doubt the ambassador was already scrambling to salvage what little control he had left. This wasn't a political standoff anymore. It was an invasion. As they pushed through the panicked crowds, Daniel tried to make sense of it. The Forsaken. He had never heard the name before, but Vara's reaction told him everything. They weren't just another faction, they were a nightmare given form. A group of Zathan warriors rushed past them, their armor gleaming under the artificial lights of the city's lower corridors. One of them, a high-ranking officer, judging by the intricate markings on his chest plate, shouted something in their language before his gaze snapped to Vara. He hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding to her, as if acknowledging her status. Then he was gone, leading his soldiers toward the battle above. Who are they? Daniel demanded as they moved deeper into the tunnels. The Forsaken, why do they scare you? Vara didn't answer at first. Her jaw was tight, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than he expected. They were Exathan once, long ago. Exiled. Stripped of honor, left to die in the void. She exhaled sharply. They did not die. Daniel swore under his breath. He had seen enough of galactic history to know what that meant. Castaways didn't survive without a reason. If the Forsaken had endured, it was because they had become something worse than the warriors who had cast them out. As they rounded a corner, the walls trembled again, dust raining down from the ceiling. The warship had fully descended now, its landing struts crushing the city's outer sector. The Forsaken weren't here to negotiate. They were here to finish something. And Daniel had a sinking feeling it was him. A transmission crackled in his earpiece. Carter. Carter, are you hearing this? The voice was strained, barely cutting through the interference. Yeah, I'm here, he shot back. What's going on? The answer came with a ragged breath. It's Earth. The Forsaken, they're hitting our colonies. Hard. We just lost the Europa outpost. Command thinks a burst of static. Then, through the distortion, two final words. Total war. Daniel stopped in his tracks, his pulse pounding in his ears. The war hadn't just started here. It had already begun. The words echoed in Daniel's head as the weight of the situation settled in. Total war. The Forsaken weren't just attacking the Exathan, they were cutting straight to the heart of humanity itself. Earth's colonies were burning, and he was stuck light years away in a city that wasn't his own, surrounded by an enemy he barely understood. Vara must have seen the shift in his expression. Carter, what is it? He barely registered the question. His mind was racing through possibilities. Earth's defense grid was the strongest in the galaxy, layered orbital defenses. Fleets stationed at every colony, planetary shields designed to withstand sieges. If Europa had fallen, either the Forsaken had technology beyond anything they'd seen, or someone had let them in. A chill ran down his spine. We need to get to a relay station. Now. Vara didn't argue. She led him through the winding tunnels, deeper into the underbelly of the city. The sounds of battle raged above, but something else gnawed at Daniel, an uneasy feeling in his gut that there was more at play here. The Forsaken weren't just here for blood. There was a purpose behind this attack, something bigger than vengeance. The relay station was buried beneath layers of reinforced plating, its walls lined with ancient Exathan communication terminals. It took seconds to bypass their system. Humanity had long since cracked the encryption of every major alien race. As the interface flickered to life, Daniel's worst fears were confirmed. A classified distress signal. Origin, Sol System. Priority, Alpha 1. The message came through, raw and unfiltered. This is Admiral Kovac, Terran Defense Network. The Black Vault has been breached. Repeat, the Black Vault has been static. Then a fragmented burst of speech. They're not ours. They shouldn't be here. Someone opened the gate. Daniel's breath hitched. The Black Vault wasn't just another secret project. It was humanity's last line of defense, a vault hidden in deep space, containing something so dangerous, so unpredictable, that even the most hardened military leaders feared its release. Some believed it held weapons of unimaginable power. Others whispered about classified AI projects long thought destroyed. But the truth was far worse. Vara stepped closer, scanning his face. What is the Black Vault? Daniel clenched his jaw. A mistake. Before he could explain, the relay station flickered, then died. The entire network crashed in an instant, cutting them off from the outside world. The tunnels vibrated, a deep, bone-shaking hum reverberating through the walls. And then, in the darkness, something answered. Not the Forsaken. Not the Exathan. Something older. A voice, cold and metallic, crackled through the dead system. Protocol Omega recognized. Reclamation unit deployed. Humanity's judgment has begun. Daniel barely had time to react before the floor split open beneath them. Daniel hit the ground hard, rolling through the debris as the tunnel floor collapsed beneath them. Dust choked the air, but he didn't have time to process the pain. The moment his boots found solid ground, he was moving, reaching for Vara, pulling her up. Above them, the darkness stirred, and a new sound filled the cavern, a mechanical clicking, like something ancient waking from slumber. Vara's voice was tight. That doesn't sound like Forsaken. No. This was something worse. A beam of cold blue light lanced through the dust, scanning the ruins. The air itself seemed to crackle with energy as figures stepped into view, hulking constructs of metal and sinew, their forms eerily human yet unmistakably alien. Their bodies pulsed with energy, and their eyes burned with the same cold light. Daniel had seen classified reports, experimental footage from long-forgotten wars, but nothing prepared him for seeing them in the flesh. Reclamation units, the things humanity had locked away in the Black Vault. The last remnants of an ancient AI war that had nearly wiped them out centuries ago. The machines didn't hesitate. They moved with brutal efficiency, their weapons forming out of their own bodies, shifting seamlessly as they advanced. The first shot came in an instant, a crackling energy bolt that vaporized a section of the tunnel behind them. Daniel didn't wait for a second. Run! Vara barely kept pace as they sprinted through the crumbling passage, but Daniel knew running wasn't an option. Not against them. He hit his communicator. Command, this is Carter. The vault is breached. Repeat, the vault is static. Another blast tore through the tunnel, forcing them to skid behind cover. Daniel's mind raced. There had to be something they could use, some way to turn the tide. And then it hit him the Exathan's core. He turned to Vara. You have an energy grid, right? Something that powers this city? She was breathing hard but nodded. Yes, but what does that? Daniel didn't wait for her to finish. We need to overload it. If we can send a surge through the tunnels, we can fry every machine in this sector. Her eyes widened. That would disable everything, including our defenses. Better than letting them reach the surface. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, she tapped her wrist console. Follow me. They tore through the ruins, dodging fire as the machines closed in. The city's core loomed ahead, a massive sphere of pulsing energy, the lifeblood of the Exathan capital. Daniel grabbed a console, working fast. Divert all power. Every last drop. Vara didn't hesitate. She keyed in the override, and the core began to pulse faster, its glow intensifying. The machines felt it. They moved faster, closing the distance. Too late. Daniel slammed his fist on the final command. The world erupted in white light. And then silence. When the dust settled, Daniel opened his eyes. The machines were still frozen mid-step, their bodies locked in place. It had worked. But as the light faded, something else caught his attention. The machines weren't destroyed. They were rebooting. And then, a voice, ancient and cold, whispered through the ruins. You cannot stop what has already begun. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at the machines, their frozen bodies flickering with residual energy. They weren't dead. They weren't even disabled. Just paused. And that voice cold, omnipresent, wasn't just a warning. It was a statement of fact. Something had already been set in motion. Vara staggered beside him, her body still trembling from the energy surge. That was supposed to work. Daniel clenched his fists. It had worked, just not the way they needed. The machines hadn't been destroyed, but something deeper had been triggered. This wasn't just a battleground anymore. It was a tomb waking from its slumber. He forced himself to think. The reclamation units weren't here by chance. They had been locked away for a reason. And someone had let them out. His mind raced through the possibilities. The Dominion? Another faction? Or something even older than humanity itself? The answer came as a soft hum from deep within the ruins. A pulse of energy rippled outward, and the machines twitched. Not hostile. Not attacking. Just waiting. Then the voice returned, whispering through the dust. Humanity persists. Against reason. Against fate. Daniel's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just an AI. It was something beyond intelligence, something that had watched humanity struggle from the dark, unseen, calculating. Vara's grip tightened on his arm. Daniel, they're not fighting us. He looked at the machines again, realization dawning. The reclamation units weren't an enemy. They were assessing, measuring humanity, weighing them against something else. And for the first time in centuries, they had been woken up to decide. Daniel exhaled slowly. We need to leave. Vara nodded, and together they pulled away from the ruins, back toward the surface. As they climbed, the city around them flickered with dying lights, entire sectors shutting down. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. But something had changed. Humanity had survived again. Not by sheer force, not through blind luck, but by doing what it always did, adapting. As they reached the surface, the sky stretched wide before them, warships still tangled in distant battles. The Dominion fleet was pulling back, their forces crumbling. The Exans stood in quiet awe, seeing their world still standing against all odds. And in the silence that followed, Daniel knew what came next. The war wasn't over. The alliances were fragile. And somewhere in the deep void, something ancient was watching. But as long as humanity still stood, as long as they could fight, adapt, and endure, there was still hope. Daniel turned to Vara, a tired grin on his face. Let's get back to work.